Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you so much for being here. I wanted to today talk about a topic, and this is probably, one of the most probably controversial, but also eye-opening topics that when people start looking at their dynamic and the cycle of abuse that they really feel like, super confused by, super triggered by, and that is the topic of sexual coercion. And today I wanted to share something that I did share on my Substack. If you don't know what Substack is, it's basically a blog that operates a little bit more like a community, and I have been posting there more monthly. I'm trying to do monthly topics right now with some other things sprinkled in. The family court stuff that I do has not made its way there, but I wanted to share a bit about just the different various parts of healing, because I talk to so many different people at so many different stages of their healing journey. And it's allowed me to expand a lot more and also share some personal stories that are behind the paywall. Before we dive into today's topic, which is a bit more of a personal story, it's kind of like the kinds of things that I would share there. I want to talk just briefly about my offerings. And so I love connecting with people from the podcast. I honestly, I love doing the podcast. I have so many topics, that I want to touch on between now and forever. But yeah, I just want to express my gratitude. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to learn more about me, more about what I do, you can go to my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. But if you are looking for more high conflict divorce stuff, it would be high-conflictdivorcecoaching.com. On my websites, both of them, they connect to each other, but you can also find my courses, how to identify emotional abuse and see if that's what you're experiencing in your relationship, how to begin to break the trauma bond. I have 2 courses on divorcing a narcissist, which really means divorcing a high conflict person. And I do one-on-one coaching. I do it consistently. So people that want to work with me longer term to break through whatever part of the cycle they're in, and a one-off call. So that's almost like if you are really experiencing, discomfort and want to understand what's going on, want to begin to set up a plan, but maybe are not ready to take a lot of steps, but definitely need a step, you can reach out to me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com to set that up, or you can just book it right on my website. You just select validation call, you pick a time, and there's a couple of questions that I ask you to fill out. So that way, when I get on, I am sort of starting from the beginning. Okay. So I want to dive into this, and this has all been started from basically thinking more about sexual coercion and how it is framed as a need. In my case, it took me a really long time to see the relationship for what it was. When I started recognizing this, or some of the themes of it, it happened during a specific relationship, but then I would look back and really see it happening across the board. I would really see it happening in past relationships. Even my first sexual experience was certainly coercive. But when we're, I think I was in 9th grade, the first time I got pressured to go past kissing, I didn't know what I was looking at, but that definitely continued as the years went on in various different forms. But in my last relationship, it was certainly very clear, because when I got injured and couldn't have sex, so let alone all the emotional stuff and all the exhaustion and all the reasons why I didn't want to before, why I didn't feel safe, when I got injured, he still wanted to force me into it. And so it took me a while to see that relationship for what it was. At first, it really felt like love, and it was deep. It was overwhelming. It was all consuming. He'd constantly tell me I was his everything, that he never felt this way about anybody else. It felt so familiar, kind of like that once in a lifetime stuff. And honestly, I believed him. He said it so often, it was hard not to believe him. But somewhere along the line, after the honeymoon period was over, I started to see who this person really was. And his declarations of love started to feel less like this overwhelming devotion and more like demands that were wrapped up in guilt. And they'd come all the time. And it started to feel over the top. Like, did he really miss me every 5 minutes? Because he sure told me that much. Or was he just trying to make me feel guilty for taking time for myself? Was it really a problem if I went away for a weekend without him? Did he actually respect my need for space and time? Even after spending days together, he'd often tell me how much he missed me. It was like the time together didn't happen. That this happened emotionally, but it also happened in intimacy. I felt like a human walking blow-up doll for his emotional regulation. And I just kept wondering over and over if what this relationship was supposed to feel like, or what any relationship was supposed to feel like. Maybe I was supposed to be this supportive of him all of the time, but it always felt like too much. I didn't feel like I ever had a chance to regulate my own emotions unless his needs were met first. And then one day it clicked, and this was actually after sex. We were laying in bed, and he hugged me and said, "See, I missed you so much. I needed that." And I didn't say anything at the time, but I knew in that moment when he said he missed me over and over, he didn't miss me as a human being or being with me as a person. He missed my vagina. He didn't feel validation within himself as a person unless he got sex, but he didn't feel like he needed to treat me with respect. He didn't feel like he needed to honor my boundaries. He didn't feel like he needed to give me the space I was asking for at times to just, and really, it was just so I could feel better in myself. He was using it to calm himself down. And so sex wasn't just sex for him. It was a litmus test for the relationship, a measure of my care, and somehow a way to regulate his emotions. And over time, when I wasn't available, emotionally, physically, or otherwise, he made sure that I felt it. Subtle comments like, "I'm sad we couldn't be together last night," or "I just feel disconnected from you." They really started to wear on me because they were so constant. And they weren't outright demands, but they left me feeling like I was failing as my role in the relationship. I would often get practical with him in response and say things like, "I literally met you for lunch today to help you through your work issue. Didn't that help you feel connected?" But to him, there was another category for intimacy and a category for everything else. And according to him, I needed to meet all of his unmet needs. The intimate needs were going unmet in his book. And the need to feel emotionally safe was unmet in my book. And as this went on, and as I felt more unsafe, I started to realize that sex wasn't about connection for him. It was about his own emotional regulation. He did not want to work through our issues to help me feel more safe in the relationship. He wanted me to always be ready, no matter how dead he made me feel inside. This made sex controlling because saying no had consequences. To him, he framed sex as a need, not just a desire. It wasn't about mutual intimacy, where I mattered really, but also that he was prioritizing when I was saying when I was getting emotionally distant from him and trying to express it, because I'm a very vocal person to a fault about these things, but to basically say, "I hear you and I don't want you to feel this way and I want to work to make you feel safer." It was instead used against me all the time, or it was flip-flopped. If we had sex, you'd feel connected. Nope, that's not how it works, sir. If we weren't having sex regularly, he'd spiral. And often when we weren't having sex, initially, it was due to the practicalities of life. We're both single parents. We can't do what we want to do when we want to do it. We both have jobs. We live in different homes. I need an immense amount of alone time. And if I was tired, which I often was, he'd pout and push me. When I said no, which I often did, he told me how long it has been since we had sex. He met every boundary I set with an escalation. When things started to get really rough and I was setting boundaries to remove myself from reoccurring arguments, which the boundary I was setting in this case was leaving, he would tell me that I was withholding and that he just wants to feel close to me. So that guilt made me feel pressure all the time. I started to flinch when his touch in calm moments. So like if he just reached out to hold my hand, I would flinch or rub my back because I felt like every hug or tongue pressed kiss, which he would do all the time. Like it's like instead of just giving me a kiss goodbye, he would have to like pull me in and like try and stick his tongue in my mouth. It was just like a violation of like my autonomy. Even when I said like that makes me uncomfortable, he said my love shouldn't make anybody feel uncomfortable. We can never just like cuddle. So I started reading and listening more to one of my favorite people. She's been on the podcast twice, Nat Lejeune from Bending Me. The link to her stuff will be in my show notes. And thinking more about wanted touch. I wanted to be touched, but I wanted it to be safe. I wanted to have sex, but I wanted to also work through all the disagreements and feel like my partner really cared about me. I wanted him to miss me, but handle it on his own without needing my physical body or my brain to make up for it. Whether it was a week or day or an hour, I wanted him to regulate his own emotions. And so over time, I really started to ask myself, when did my emotional safety or emotional regulation or even my wants become secondary to somebody else? Over time, things escalated more, especially when I became physically unable to have sex due to the injury I mentioned. And he would tell me he talked about it with his therapist. Which I would often reply, did you talk about your own emotional dysregulation or just mine? If you sense sarcasm, that's because it was there. And he'd bring up quote unquote patterns or rejection and tie his dysregulated emotions to our lack of physical connection. I'd ask him what he could do to help himself. And he would respond with the ways in which I trigger him. I would say things like, well, this triggers me too. And he'd often tell me that he doesn't want to beg for intimacy, in which I'd reply, sometimes only in my head, well, I don't want to beg for respect, but here I was. And he would over intellectualize it too, peppering like all his frustrations with therapy speak, as I call it, talking about micro rejections and trauma responses when I simply said no. And at first I empathized with him. I over-explained, I justified, I tried my best to be mentally ready for sex. I reorganized my schedule so I'd be less tired and more mentally and physically available to connect. I talked about this with my therapist and questioned if there was something wrong with me. I Googled it. I felt so guilty for not wanting to have sex. And then I realized that I did not feel safe, and I was working on that. He also did not feel safe emotionally, but was using my body and my mind as a way to feel safe instead of doing that work himself. And therefore, my boundaries, whether it was saying no because I was tired, stressed, or simply not in the mood, they were not treated as valid. They were treated as obstacles to be negotiated. He thought he could push me one way or the other, and my refusal became a problem for him to solve, or a challenge to overcome, or worse, an act of rejection that I had to fix because he can't have a partner who rejects him. In those moments, it didn't matter how I felt. What mattered was how my no made him feel. And he couldn't handle the no. He didn't want to explore why the no was an issue for him. Apparently, that was also my problem. And I tried to tell him that I didn't feel like my emotions or feelings mattered and asked. I would also say things like, why do you want to have sex with someone who doesn't want to right now? He wouldn't have a response to that. When I asked him to stop slapping my ass, he told me I was being mean. When I said bluntly, I could not be intimate with you after that conversation we just had. I'm too emotionally and physically exhausted and just not okay. I still found myself if I should be wondering if I should just do it. So that invisible timer that he had didn't start again. And I continued to escalate my boundaries so that he would counter that as declarations of affection. But I just love you so much. I just want to feel close to you. You're my safe space. I need this connection. And on the surface, those words seemed vulnerable, but they really carried this darker message of, if you love me, you'll do this. And then soon after that, the conversation would always turn to his struggles, his trauma, his abandonment issues. his fears of rejection, how his ex didn't have sex often, how he wanted to feel valued and cared for. He'd bring up his past, his mental health, his attempts to work through it all. And somehow I'd find myself apologizing, comforting him, and promising to do better and questioning myself. It was like walking into quicksand every day. Every time I thought I stood my ground, I'd find myself sinking again. And this is not love. Just to be clear, all of this is coercion. Love does not guilt you into ignoring your own needs to satisfy somebody else's. Love does not frame sex as a cure for emotional instability or turn boundaries into personal betrayals. What he was doing wasn't about love. It was about control. By tying sex to his emotional regulation, he made me responsible for his stability and his sanity. When I couldn't or wouldn't meet his demands, it wasn't about sex anymore. It was about whether or not I cared enough and whether I loved him enough. That's not intimacy. That is manipulation. And it didn't stop until the relationship ended. And when I reflect back on this, the most painful part of this realization is how it made me doubt myself. He framed his needs as vulnerabilities, his guilt tripping as love, his emotional vitality as trauma. He weaponized his struggles to keep me tethered to him, to make me feel like walking away or even just saying no would absolutely break him. And I still question myself. Was I cold? Was I selfish? Should I do more? But in healing, I really have learned so much about this pattern in previous sexual relationships. In this case, his behavior wasn't my responsibility. Didn't owe him my body or my boundaries. His struggles might explain why he acted the way he did, but they don't excuse it. He's responsible for that in all areas of his life. And if you've experienced something similar, I'm going to share with you what I wish somebody said to me many years ago. You're not responsible for regulating somebody else's emotions. Your body and your boundaries are your own. And anyone who truly loves you will honor that without question or coercion. You deserve to enjoy sex and to have the right to say no when you don't want to have it. Coerce and control, however subtle, is cloaked in affection, is still abuse. Recognizing it for what it is isn't just a part of healing, it's a part of reclaiming your power. You deserve love that feels safe, that feels equal, and it feels free. You don't need to doubt yourself all the time. And so I shared this story with you just so you can see if you fit into it too in your own way, and if there's anything that you want to add, or the ways in which it came up for you so that you don't feel so alone. And I highly recommend to check out Nat's work on Mending Me. Like I said, it will be in the show notes. And all of January, I posted on this in Substack. So if you do go to my Substack, which will also be in the show notes, I recommend going and looking at those articles if this resonated with you. And, if there's any other questions that come up, or like if there's another part of this that you want to understand, please ask, because I am absolutely willing, to expand on any of these topics more. As always, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being here. If you want to learn more about me, what I do, like I said, head over to emotionalabusecoach.com, on Instagram at emotionalabusecoach, and you can email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com. I really hope this was helpful.